Hello and welcome to The Menu, Monocle Radio's food and drink programme. I'm your host, Chiara Rimella. Coming up, we meet the man looking to give a surplus supply of wine a second life.
If I'm approaching winemakers saying, look, can you make me a wine like this? Then you've already kind of lost the entire point of the exercise. So you do sort of need the stars to align.
Also on the programme, we visit a new Alsatian opening in London's Fitzrovia.
I guess it comes back to this Central European style of cooking that I love. We're doing big feasting menus for bigger groups, like big show croûtes and just hearty, warming dishes, and they definitely don't look elegant, but they taste delicious.
Plus, we sit down with Sophie Wyburd to learn about her new comforting cookbook, Tucking In. All that here on The Menu on Monocle Radio. Just like any other agricultural enterprise, vineyards can often find themselves dependent on weather patterns and the unpredictability of the climate, and every harvest can be different. Sometimes that means a small production, but other times it means a bumper crop, and not all winemakers are set up to bring all the results to market. South African-born entrepreneur Angelo van Dyk had been working in close contact with many of his home country's producers, and he was keenly aware of how much of their bounty was being lost. That's why he set out to create the Wasted Wine Club. The idea is to take the surplus from small independent winemakers and bottle it behind a beautiful label, sometimes collaborating directly with restaurants, as is the case for the red he developed for London restaurant Smokestack. I sat down with Angelo in the studio at Midori House to find out more about how even small projects can make a difference in turning the industry more sustainable.
We're going to go back to 2020, before any whispers of the pandemic were happening. I spent quite a bit of time back in South Africa, which is where I'm originally from. I make a little bit of wine under my own wine label, but I was tasting with a friend of mine who also happens to be a winemaker. He has his own label, and we were tasting through a bunch of barrels in the cellar, and he kind of pointed to 3 in the corner and was like, look, I've got these 3 barrels from 2018. It's an old vintage that we didn't bottle at the time. It was excess wine that we didn't need. Don't really know what to do with it. We might blend it away, we might bin it. And that was kind of the light bulb moment where I was like, well, let's taste the wine. There's nothing wrong with the wine. Why would we simply discard it? And it got me thinking, is there an opportunity here to work with it? The product is sound, and is there something interesting that we could do? So that was sort of the catalyst for starting to kind of probe and poke and ask questions as to, how often does this happen? And if so, if there is prevalence of it, what could we do about it?
I certainly was surprised myself to find out that so much wine is wasted. And I don't think that many people realize. But how is it possible that there is surplus good wine, and why, and what normally happens to it?
Yeah, I think it is a little bit of an abstract concept in the sense that I think people often forget that wine is a natural product. It's something that is fundamentally linked to seasons. And at the end of the day, there's always going to be ebb and flow of quantity of raw material, being the grape. And at the end of the day, sometimes there's less, sometimes there's more. And the producer ultimately can make as much wine as they want, depending on how they farm and grow their fruits. But at the end of the day, you still have to have a consumer base to consume it and press demand for it. And so the circumstances where there has been excess wine left over, so far in my experience of doing Wasted Wine Club, have just been a multitude of different reasons. But it can be linked to market pressures. It can be linked to weather conditions. So you end up with a big crop and you just have more product than you're able to sell. The first bottling that we did was actually a bit of a kind of domino effect from COVID-19, because in South Africa, there was a nationwide prohibition of the sale and consumption or purchasing of alcohol for basically 8 months of the year. So we had winemakers, who had produced wine and were unable to sell it. It was illegal to sell it. Unless you had an export market, which not everybody does, there were people sitting on, bottles and bottles of wine that, couldn't go anywhere. So that was the initial bottling that we did was on, based off of that premise and that reason. But it's been quite eye-opening, as I say, starting to kind of explore the landscape, the reasons as to why people have these leftover bits and pieces. And I suppose to answer your question, they don't really have a lot at their disposal in terms of working with the excess. They can sell it off for bulk, but the bulk market, you get back pennies and cents. You know, it really is the bare minimum. So in terms of the sustainability of that argument, it puts farmers on one hand, but then equally the producer in a bit of a pickle, because maybe they recoup a little bit, but they'll ultimately end up losing if they do go that route. Otherwise, they'll slowly kind of blend away the wine and they'll make it disappear. We're talking, you know, if there's a couple of barrels of it, you can slowly start to get rid of it. But then at the same time, you also kind of lose a little bit of the integrity of that initial wine. It just sort of gets diluted into a much bigger picture. And then, yeah, I mean, in some instances, I've spoken to producers where they've actually just got rid of it. They've poured it down the drain. You know, you literally just turn the barrel upside down and the wine runs out. And it's cheaper to go that route, to discard it, than to run the entire process of trying to bottle it, label it, find a market to consume it.
But, I mean, you said the S word there, and I think that we should go into it. Like, because I think so many businesses nowadays really drive home the concept of sustainability. But what does that word mean to you and to your business? Do you think that it is possible for a business in the food industry to be truly sustainable? And what does it mean? Is it just an approximation? How do you interpret it?
It's a great question. And I think it's still very much a landscape that I'm understanding and getting to understand. And I think what's always been kind of difficult for me to gauge is, I think the term is very loosely used these days, and everybody kind of clips on sustainability onto their product because it's obviously a very current topic and a very important one. It is something that I'm still trying to understand, and I'm also trying to understand, like, especially when it comes to food and wine, people have different aggregates on what they consider to be sustainable, and people also have different hierarchies on what they consider to be the more important part of the sustainability conversation. So I think often the farming aspect of it is what comes up first, which is fundamental when you look at a very kind of long-term picture of sustainability, especially in agri, soil health, and just being able to kind of continue to do this hundreds of years from now. But then there is obviously a lot surrounding waste. There's a lot surrounding packaging. You know, what do carbon emissions look like? You know, a lot of the people that I first introduced the concept of Wasted Wine Club to said, okay, but are the wines, you know, going to be put in cans? You know, are they going to be put in bag-and-box? Because that obviously makes more sense from a carbon footprint perspective. For me, I may be kind of considering this project in a little bit of isolation, but certainly there is a much bigger picture playing out in the back of my mind. You know, I realize Rome wasn't built in a day, and I've probably got a long way to go when it comes to ticking all the boxes. But I think the first step for me was the most important one. And I do hope that sort of, down the line, you can start to kind of address all these other little facets of it. Can a business truly be sustainable in the food and wine industry? I think so. I don't know if we'll ever get it totally right, but I do think there's a lot of merit in what a lot of people are doing.
So the first wine that you bottled was from South Africa, but then others are coming from other locations as well. How do you choose these producers? How is this network put together?
So far, it's actually been a remarkable exercise in just word of mouth, friends, network. Everybody that I've bottled wine with so far, have been either first-degree friends or friends of friends. It's both a blessing and a curse, I think, but the wine industry is very small. You know, I think for me, one of the most amazing things about wine is its ability to connect people, and that's an aspect of it that I've always loved. And there is a sense of community that exists. And so it was, as soon as I sort of planted the seed of, okay, this idea that I want to roll out, who are people that might be interested in it? It was kind of just a matter of reaching out, explaining, you know, by nature, Wasted Wine Club isn't always just available. You know, I don't think I ever wanted to be a white labeling exercise, because then it sort of defeats the object of it being wasted. You know, if I'm approaching winemakers saying, look, can you make me a wine like this? Then you've already kind of lost the entire point of the exercise. So you do sort of need the stars to align, but
it's a bit guerrilla in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, so far the wines have been amazing, and they've all sort of popped up at the right time. You know, for me, it's also an opportunity to help producers. You know, I think to give them a creative opportunity to work with these wines, perhaps engage with a new audience. For me, that's also really exciting to put the wines under a new label, but also have full transparency in who's made it, where it's from, what it is. Because I don't claim to have reinvented the wheel here. I think people have done other versions of the Wasted Wine Club concept, but I think it's always sort of lent into the premise of it's a no-name label number 21 or whatever it might be. And so you buy this bottle either getting a huge deal or just, getting something that was left over, but you never know what it is. But for me, I think it's important to kind of celebrate what it is, who's made it, and how it came to be. So far, the network is obviously strongest in South Africa, and those have been the producers that we've done a lot of work with. But there is a wine landing shortly from California. And again, that's a friend that I made whilst out there. So, yeah, the first non-South African wine. And we're busy chatting to another guy who's making wine in Provence in France now, who I had worked with in California. He's now back there making his own wine. So, yeah, always these little degrees of connection. Yeah.
How important a role do restaurants play in all this? Because you have a wine coming out with Smokestack, called Smokestack Red. How important is it to have an outlet through restaurants, and how much work can they do to bring customers on board? And also, what does it taste like? Is it going to be good?
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, I was reflecting on this today, just considering when I first started Wasted Wine Club, the idea was that it would only be sold direct to consumer. And to be fair, that has sort of been the strategy since it began. The places where we have sold the wines to in the past have been partners or restaurants that I felt have sort of embodied the ethos of zero waste cooking, or they have a very strong sustainability angle in their restaurants. And so it was always a focus on direct to consumer, because I think there's a really strong message that needs to be communicated, and that could easily be lost if the wine is just sitting on a list or sitting on a shelf in a wine shop. But I have noticed that the places that have worked with the wine have really kind of embraced the idea and have really kind of championed what these producers are doing and what we are trying to achieve as a business. And so when the opportunity came along to work with Smokestack, it was again a case of needing the stars to align, because we wanted to make a wine that would work well with what Smokestack is producing in terms of food and their whole vibe. But again, equally, we couldn't just sort of walk in somewhere and say, can you make us this wine? Because it doesn't work with the ethos. So, yeah, I mean, it's an amazing opportunity, but I do think that at the end of the day, when you get the buy-in from restaurants and from shops, they really get it. And I think it adds another layer of exposure, and I think it does shine the light on an issue that not a lot of people know about. And it's certainly not a topic of conversation that ever really gets spoken about. That wine was awesome. I'm really, really excited about it. And I mean, we're working with a winemaker who is South African. His name is Jurgen Goos. He's based out in the Swartland. I'd say he's probably one of the more important producers when it comes to the sort of new wave scene that's happening in South Africa. But the wine is, it's just really vivid. It's really bright. It's a really easy style of wine. But I think, Smokestack did an amazing job of the branding, the actual label of it. They did an in-house design, which looks stunning. And I think that wine's going to sing for sure.
That was Angelo van Dyk speaking to me at Midori House. You're listening to The Menu. Next, this month seems like the perfect time to pay a visit to July, a new restaurant in London Fitzrovia. Plenty of kitchens have rediscovered the joys of traditional French cuisine recently, but this spot has taken a particularly focused approach by zooming in on the dishes of Alsace. This region that borders both Germany and northern Switzerland has a tradition in humble and hearty recipes that borrow from across its neighbouring countries too. Monocle's Alistair MacQueen paid a visit to the all-day bistro to meet head chef Holly Hayes and discover what attracted her to the owner's fare on the menu.
July restaurant only opened earlier this year in April. And when we visit on a changeable spring morning, people are wandering in, inquiring whether it's even open at all. While it offers coffee and pastries in the morning, and apéro in the afternoon, lunch and dinner are the true highlights here, with North European dishes ranging from cold cuts, fresh terrine, schnitznels, spatchli and Munster gratin and spaghetti eyes. Founded by French-Swiss food journalist Selenka Dumas and her Austrian co-founder Julian Oskman, July was a manifestation of their vision to translate the sharing nature of the supper clubs they held in their Berlin flat to a fully fledged restaurant. Holly Hayes, the former sous chef at Bermondsey's much-lauded 40 Maltby Street, was chosen to be July's head chef and bring her creativity to the restaurant's Alsace-influenced menu using fresh produce and seasonal ingredients. How did she feel about joining this new venture?
We were kind of in conversation about kind of what July would be and how it would all come about from, I mean, they were obviously working on the project a lot longer, but from kind of September time I came on board and then, opened the doors in April. Yeah, it kind of went from like 0 to 100 of kind of both of us trying to figure out, who each one of them were, and obviously from never meeting someone before and then embarking on this massive journey is like, I think, both a lot of kind of scoping each other out and then, realising that we both, all three of us had very much the same focus and the same ideas going into it and kind of all wanted the same thing out of it, kind of working with amazing producers, having a really low intervention wine list, going along really low intervention produce and working with amazing farmers. And and kind of keeping like simplicity at its core, but just done very well.
It's not just Holly in the kitchen. Joining her is Ange Goulton, who worked with Hayes at 40 Maltby Street and forms an important part of using the pair's experience and pluck to turn the idea of July into something tangible and tasty.
They obviously came to me without really a background in hospitality, but a kind of great love of food and hosting and kind of needing someone to fulfill that space of having the cooking background and the experience of being able to pull this off, I guess. So they kind of came to me with their like main concept and idea, and this kind of like homely cooking is, so myself and Angie, who works here as well, we kind of have cooked for a long time together now and had the same ethos at the core of our cooking, this kind of like homely, unpretentious cookery.
Once she agreed to get involved in the venture, were there any particular restaurants that inspired her or helped shape her idea of what July would become?
I'm always inspired by places like Cafe Deco or Cafe Cecilia, Noble Rot. That kind of does it in a more finesse way maybe, but all those kind of Central European cookery.
July's menu is ever-changing, subject to ingredients being available or in season at any given time. Does this present an opportunity or a challenge for the restaurant?
So it's like definitely produce first. If I get an email or a WhatsApp saying we've got this, it's like brilliant, let's put it on, because the menu definitely comes from the suppliers as opposed to us sitting down and being like, right, what do we want to cook, and then finding it kind of works the other way, which is great, kind of writes the menu for us really.
What's the provenance of the food? Are there any particular suppliers that feed into the restaurant's philosophy of responsible procurement and sustainable sourcing?
So we work with Henderson Seafood, which have their day boats down in Brixham, who are amazing. And then we're working, with Kate at Lindley Farm, who's just doing like incredible stuff down in Shropshire, really beautiful vegetables. And then Shrub, who, taking London by storm, and they get veg from all over, but it's all kind of smaller farmers. It's like sustainability is at the forefront, and it's, kind of as low impact. A lot of the farmers we work with like no-till, and kind of looking after the land first.
As well as the ethical sourcing of produce, what really excited Hayes about the prospect of leading a kitchen that produces Alsace cuisine?
I guess it comes back to this like Central European style of cooking that I love, and this kind of like old school like peasant cookery really, which I feel like a lot of Alsace food is like very much that. Like we're doing big feasting menus for bigger groups, like big show croûtes and braised sauerkraut and things like that, which is just so great and so up my street. Just like hearty, warming dishes, and they definitely don't look elegant, but they taste delicious.
Alsatian food can sometimes be overshadowed by the more well-known and broader European cuisines. But what is it that July can offer to people unfamiliar with this type of cooking?
I feel like Alsace food is having its moment. I feel like show croûtes are kind of popping up everywhere. Well, maybe not everywhere, but they're around. I think Whether or not you've been to the Alsace or recognise that kind of food, it's just got a really like deeply homely feel to it. It kind of feels like, you know, someone's grandma's cooking. Whether or not you're like familiar with it, it kind of has this familiarity alongside it. Yeah, which I don't really know why, but it's just comfort food, I guess.
For Monocle in Fitzrovia, I'm Alistair MacQueen.
Thank you, Alistair. This is The Menu. Now it's time for the week's top food and drink headlines. Here is Monocle's Monica Lillis.
The world's top salmon farmers in Norway and Chile have experienced increasing threats to their produce in recent months, including from killer jellyfish and bacteria. As a result, global prices have remained high. This is coupled with soaring demand for the popular fish as consumers have moved away from red meat consumption, as well as an increasing appetite for seafood in China. The Asia's 50 Best Bar ceremony was held this week at the Rosewood Hotel in Hong Kong, crowning Bar Leone, an Italian cocktail spot in the heart of the city, the best bar in the region. The nation of Singapore also came up trumps, with 11 bars in the top 50, including Jigger and Pony at number 3 and Nutmeg and Clove at number 6. The list, first put together in 2016, also added a new category this year, Best Bar Design, which went to Atlas Bar in Singapore. And finally, Munich, home of Germany's hallowed Oktoberfest beer festival, will open its first alcohol-free beer garden this week in a nod to changing alcohol consumption habits and growing resentment with public binge drinking. Die Null, located near the Bavarian capital's main railway station, will serve customers mocktails, juice and soft drinks, as well as alcohol-free beer. The venue, which will be open until mid-September, will allow guests to bring their own food and there will be free live entertainment provided. Those are the week's food and drink headlines. Now back to Chiara.
Thanks, Monica. You're listening to The Menu. And finally, for chef and cookbook author Sophie Wyburd, great food does not mean complicated food. From the simple comfort of a jacket potato to hearty South Asian-inspired curries, Sophie's debut cookbook, Tucking In, is about dishes that can be shared across the table as wine flows freely and guests put the world to rights. From time spent working for popular recipe platform Mob Kitchen to her big mad family and her fondness for mix and match dinners, Sophie sat down with Monocle's Paige Reynolds to get to the heart of her food philosophy and discuss her career so far, which all started in iconic Soho eatery Quo Vadis.
That was my first real kitchen job. I'd done street food stuff before then. But working at Quo Vadis, I was just exposed to so many ingredients that I'd never even heard of before. And I think Jeremy's philosophy and the food that's cooked at Quo Vadis is very much produce-led. It's just classical in its cooking techniques. They're not trying to do anything over the top. There's no foams and mousses and anything like that. It's just kind of good, honest food, treating ingredients right. And I do think that I did learn a lot of that. Just, what is the best way to roast a tomato? What's the best way to cook a bit of fish? How do you make a really solid mayonnaise? It's all those kind of basic techniques that I very much use in my day-to-day cooking still.
It's funny you mentioned sort of the foams and the dry ice of the food world. Did you ever have your kind of like Heston Blumenthal era that you've kind of come back from?
Do you know, it's never really been food that has excited me to cook. I really appreciate the skill of it and the theatre of it. And, maybe once or twice a year I enjoy going to eat a meal that's like that. But generally, I feel like my food has always leaned much more towards kind of big, hearty portions of things to share, big pots of things in the middle of a table. It's not fussy and plated.
I mean, something that you talk about right at the start of this book is that your food philosophy is very much informed by your big, mad family, I think you potentially refer to them. I hope you do, otherwise
verbatim, that is what I call them. They wouldn't mind me saying it.
And I guess, so what were kind of the sort of food memories you have of, growing up in that kind of household? And I guess how's that informed the chef you are today, the cook you are today?
It was very much a foodie household, but not in any kind of fancy, ostentatious way. It was just, that was the core pillar of how we hung out with each other. So every night after school and on the weekends, we would all have dinner all together. My 4 sisters, me and my parents. So 7 people around the table every night, obligatory. And it was so formative, those meals that we all spent together. My mum's a great cook, so is my dad actually, but my mum was doing the bulk of the cooking, I would say, growing up. And it was always, quite classic British hearty comfort food stuff. And she cooks everything in such a fuss-free way. I feel like lots of mums have a knack for this kind of cooking, which is regularly cooking a massive spread for a lot of people with lots of different dietary requirements and just never looking stressed by it, never breaking a sweat. And it's always delicious. Every single bit of it is always so delicious.
This book is so much about comfort and how food can provide that for you. I feel like there's kind of been a trend back towards that kind of in the food world. I feel like we went quite austere, but now we've kind of brought it back to I guess being less snobbish about things and more about comfort. But I guess maybe you could put it in your own words what comfort food and comfort eating means for you.
Yeah, totally. I really agree. I feel like it must be something to do with COVID and the fact that none of us were together for so long. We were all having our own existential crises in our own little flats, and food for people really provided an activity and entertainment and comfort in those really hard times. And I think that's part of why we've had the swing back to comfort food and people remembering that that's a thing that you can give yourself to make yourself feel great. And comfort food for me literally just means anything that makes you feel good, whether that's a jacket potato with baked beans, which is one of my favourite meals in the universe, or whether it's a lasagna or it's a pie. Or, for some people it might mean lighter things. It's so individual what a comfort food is to somebody. But for me, it definitely means food that is probably slightly beige in colour. Carbs are normally involved in my definition of comfort food.
Yeah, there's a whole chapter called Carb City.
Oh yeah, I love Carb City. I'm a resident there.
If you're doing a no carbs before Marbs summer, it's the wrong book for you.
Yeah, don't look at that one. Don't look at the halloumi rostis with tzatziki. Don't look at the sesame roast potatoes. Avert your eyes.
There's also there's some kind of, is it like a vodka pasta?
It's a chipotle vodka gnocchi bake. It takes no time to cook and it's so... Just any pasta that's tomatoey enriched with something creamy is my kryptonite. There's a couple of those in there, actually. I can't resist. I think there's 3 versions of a creamy tomato pasta there.
Oh my gosh. Well, if you're bulking for summer.
Oh yeah, exactly. Maybe no carbs for Marbs, but if you got some marathons to run, get involved.
And then we haven't really spoken about it, but obviously you spent a lot of time doing food for Mob.
Mm-hmm, I did indeed.
And I guess they were quite at the forefront of social media food recipe creation. I'm sure there's a slightly more catchier way of saying it. But it is interesting. I guess I've been thinking a lot because, whenever I'm sort of scrolling on Instagram or TikTok or Twitter and I'm so drawn in by recipes and I'm pressing save. But I actually don't feel like I go back to them that often. And I don't know, I think there's really something to be said for like curating a whole book's worth of recipes. You feel a bit more like connected to it. So I guess you've worked in that for so long. I wonder what your thoughts are.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I feel like lots of it is generational, I'm a millennial. So for me, I grew up in the era of, Nigella, Jamie on the telly with their cookbooks. And that was always kind of the blueprint of a career that I really wanted. So the prestige of having a book still to me is so special. And I cook from books all the time. I have so many cookbooks at home and will never stop buying cookbooks. But I imagine for younger generations, that's less how it works. I think that younger people definitely do get the majority of their food inspiration from online. So it's quite a cool space to be able to occupy both, I think, and kind of hit different niches through that. It's kind of a different world because I think there's people who have been creating recipes for years and years and years and years and are brilliant recipe developers, whether that's working in magazines or restaurants or kind of working as a home ec behind the scenes on, TV and film stuff. And then there's kind of more new up-and-comers on social media who maybe don't have that actual recipe development background. It's more kind of food for entertainment's sake. And I feel like that can be a bit of a clash in the industry between those two sides of it. Even within publishing now, you basically need a big social media following to get a publishing deal these days. And there's lots of people who are brilliant recipe developers but don't exist so much on social media, and they find it much harder to get book deals, even though that's the sphere that they would traditionally exist in. So it's quite an interesting dichotomy between those two sides of it.
It's just a different ecosystem, isn't it?
Totally,
I think
totally.
It's the same whether you're looking at food or music or theatre. I know actors who can't get jobs because they don't have the right followings, which is
yeah. So
insane.
Much of it is about kind of turning social media into your portfolio these days, which I think is really valuable, and it does democratise the space in a lot of ways. But it's also, I feel quite old and not tech savvy. Despite only being 30, I feel ancient in the landscape. And it can be hard to keep up with, algorithm changes and trends. Sometimes it gets easy to lose touch of what you're actually trying to do, which is just make really nice recipes.
Yeah, and that's why it's so nice to have this physical book. One thing I wanted to talk about just before we go is the section at the back. about how not to lose your mind while hosting. I think it might be good for our listeners, who I'm sure will be hosting lots of people over the late summer in their gardens, maybe al fresco. Let's talk through it a little bit.
Absolutely, let's dive in.
No need for matching plates?
No, I feel like not many young people have matching plates. I think I've got like 3 matching bowls, and everything else is pretty mishmashed.
And then one thing breaks and you're like, oh, I give up.
Yeah, give up. Doesn't matter. I actually think it looks nice when everything's a bit haphazard.
You don't need to make everything yourself. I think that's quite good wisdom.
Yeah, I think, I feel like lifting the curtain a bit behind being kind of a person who works in food. I buy shop-bought dips all the time. I buy shop-bought bread all the time. I buy nice cooked hams and stuff. You just don't need to make everything yourself. It's more stressful if you're trying to do literally everything from scratch. And actually, with things like hummus, buy it in the supermarket and then get it into a nice bowl and drizzle it with something delicious.
The washing up can wait until morning, which I actually think is potentially controversial.
I feel like it is controversial, and lots of people would say, get it out of the way, otherwise in the morning you'll be devastated. But I don't know, I feel like I've been there when you've had a couple of drinks and you're not in the mood. And also, I feel like there's a bit of a signal doing the washing up that's kicking people out of the house. And maybe you're not ready to kick people out of the house. And maybe when you're ready to kick people out of the house, that's when you're ready to go to bed.
Yeah, there's always that one really overeager person at the dinner party that starts putting the plates in the dishwasher, and it can kill the vibe.
It can really kill a vibe. I actually think you need to leave them a bit dirty on the table for a bit and wait for people to kind of settle into their post-dinner personas before you start clearing stuff away.
Post-dinner persona. I won't ask you what yours is.
It's tequila. It's getting the tequila out. It's getting the Craig Davids going.
I love it.
Danger.
Number 6, choose which plates to serve things on ahead of time.
Yeah, this is quite lame, but it's something that I do a lot when I'm cooking for lots of people. I get my serving plates out and I put a little post-it on them saying what every dish is going to go on.
An overcrowded oven takes much longer to cook. I have fallen foul to this. I'm just like, yep, everything in at the same time.
And it takes like 2 hours longer to cook than it would have otherwise. I had it when I cooked a big Christmas dinner for maybe 16 people last year, and there was some dauphinoise in the oven for literally 2.5 hours. They normally cook in 1, but there was so much other stuff in there that they were just not happening.
And then I'm actually going to choose one more, which I really liked, because, again, it's something that I tend to do. People are generally thrilled to eat anything they didn't have to cook themselves. Never apologise for the cooking when you sit down to eat. I always do that. It's not my best. It's not my best.
It's such a British sensibility, isn't it? Just to be like, yeah, sorry, it's quite rubbish. I actually had that chicken in the oven 5 minutes too long. Don't do it. People love eating food they haven't cooked, and they're there to hang out with you. They're not there to have some crazy gourmet experience generally. So just relax.
Monocle's Paige Reynolds there, speaking to Sophie Wyburd. And that's all for this edition of The Menu. Remember that we are back with a new episode again on Friday at 2000 London time. That's at midday in San Francisco. Also, don't forget to tune into our spin-off show Food Neighborhoods for a tour of some of the world's tastiest destinations. I am Chiara Rimella. This programme was produced by Monica Lillis, and our sound engineers were Jack Jewis, Mariella Bevan and Sarah Nichol. Thanks for listening, and until next week.